And now it's time for Shelf Life, news from the Witchard Stouffville Public Library, with your host, librarian Catherine Sword.
Hello everyone, and today I'm going to try a genre that I don't normally read, a mystery story. And I have a young author who's written her first book. This is A. Smith, and she's written The Perfect Crime. So, where did you come up with this idea? How did you get started with writing mysteries?
Well, I've written other novels actually before this one. I have other manuscripts sitting at home still. I had a dream of a scene. And then once I woke up, I remembered that scene, and all I had to do then was figure out why the characters were there, who had made them go there, and I just started asking myself all of these questions, and then I realized that it had turned into a story.
Oh, wow.
And then it became so easy to write because it was me answering the questions that I had for myself based on this scene that I kind of had dreamt up at one point.
That's amazing. So you get the scene, without giving things away to the listeners. Was it the beginning of the story or the end of the story?
It was the beginning. The first two pages, the opening scene where they're just in a warehouse, and that was what I had in my dream when I woke up.
And then you had to take it from there. Oh, wow.
Yes.
Now, is that how you would normally write a story? Just start from the beginning and keep going, or do you get an idea? Other writers I've interviewed talked about they know where they want to go, and then they have to figure out how they get there. This sounds opposite.
See, I've had that in certain novels as well. The only problem I have is I focus a lot more on my characters than I usually do on my plot, and what happens is I usually have an end plot in sight, but then my characters shift it, and I realize that where I want to go is no longer plausible with how the characters have evolved or developed, and so I have to usually change the ending, and so I've just focused now, and I continue to focus more on the characters, and they lead me, and they just drive the plot forward.
Very good. May I ask how long you've been writing?
Well, my mother has proof that I've been writing since I was 3.5 years old.
Okay.
Those stories were not as good, I must admit.
You can rewrite.
I should. I think the first novel I wrote was in grade 4.
Wow.
But I've been writing short stories and stuff before that. I've won short story contests before that. So I've been writing for, I would say, at least 15 years then.
Nice.
I would say.
Well, then that's probably why it comes out so polished, because I've been reading it. I'm not through yet, so we're not giving anyone the answers yet. And it flows nicely. I can see where you say you concentrate on your characters, because early on I thought, there's too many of them. I'm not going to be able to follow them all. But you give them each nice little quirks, so I know, okay, that's the smart guy. Oh, that's the guy who's a little nervous. So I'm following that. Have you taken writing courses?
Yes, actually, when I was in grade 10, I took a couple of university-level courses. Well, in my high school, we had creative writing courses that I took as well. And then now I'm in university, and I'm doing a minor in English and a minor in creative writing, so I'm taking a lot more now, and I excel in those because I guess,
Wonderful. So mystery seems to be your genre. Is that what the other novels are as well?
No, actually, mystery was the last genre I tried. I started with sort of an adventure, went to fantasy romance-ish, and I wrote a sci-fi as well. Those have yet to be edited, but this one seemed the easiest to write for me, and I'm not sure why, and that's why I worked on it, not only just the writing, but in the editing, which is why it's the first one that came out.
That's right. That's it. So do you think you're going to gravitate towards mysteries then? I mean, if you've tried everything.
I'm not sure. I don't think that I have a preference when writing. When reading, I do love mysteries, but when writing, there is something about fantasy, for example, that allows for so much more imagination than you have in a mystery novel that is set in the real world. I get to create anything that I want in fantasy, and that's something that I love to do. So I'm kind of still stuck between those two main genres, at least for now.
Well, regardless of which genre you pick, I had this discussion with a friend of mine who writes nonfiction, and she said to me, you have it so easy because you're just writing fiction, you can make it all up. But you have to keep it straight. Can you tell me a little bit about your writing process? How do you keep all the storylines straight? How do you get the people straight? And in the fantasy, the worlds, how do you keep that stuff together?
That, especially in fantasy for me, takes a lot more planning. Okay. I have filing cabinets with different notes of different worlds that I've created, because I need to make sure that if I write it in one story that I don't duplicate any aspects in another, because I want it to be fresh and original in whatever novel I do.
That's going to be tough.
It is, but it's more challenging, and I kind of like that it's an adventure just to write.
Okay.
So I have to keep track of what is the origin story of this world? How did it come to be? And what are the rules in this world? How do people live? And I need to make sure that it's consistent throughout. And those are things that, like when I edit, one of the edits is just for consistency, to make sure that the plot itself follows and that there's nothing that is a bit off. Because I'm really, like when I read by myself, those are things that I don't want to see in novels that I read. So I'm like, I shouldn't do that to my readers.
That's right. Actually, I'm glad you put it that way, because I think some of the writers out there get bogged down and they think the editing is just looking for the typos. But it is exactly, you're looking for consistency. What else would you be looking for?
Well, I also look for character evolution. Though, because my characters are so important to me, I make sure that they do not remain static, that they are not just... Because it seems very implausible that a character would not change given the circumstances that I put them in. Because they should be representations of real life, and any situation should change you or make you learn something in some way, shape, or form. And so I really make sure that from the beginning to the end I can see that these characters are not the same person in the end that they were at the beginning. So that's another thing that I really focus on, and the relationships between the characters as well.
Now, you said you also wrote a science fiction, and I'm thinking of some of the books at the libraries. I'll have to introduce you to that later. World building, and it's exactly what you're talking about. How does a person build a world? What about keeping track of science? The science fiction story that you wrote, is it scientific, hard science, or soft science, if you know what I mean?
It is a bit more soft science, but I'm finding myself doing a lot of research in the hard science as well, just because I want to make sure that there's not an aspect of it that I'm missing out on that would add to the world in a way that I'm not sure of, because I'm not as much of a science person. Now, I must admit, though, I'm using mostly Wikipedia, so it's not just the best information, but, like, for a basis, I just want to get an idea of, like, what sort of things happen in the universe, whether it's with spatial science and what happens out there. I write more in soft science, but I still research in the hard science just to make sure that it seems plausible to people who read science fiction.
Can you tell me some authors that you admire and read for your own pleasure?
Well, right now I am reading the Alex Cross series by James Patterson, which is one of my favorite mystery series right now. I started reading it not too long ago. It's been out for a while. I started reading it like a year or so ago. And I can see not only the evolution of the character, but of James Patterson himself, the writer. I can see how much better it is, the writing from the first novel to like the 10th novel. And it kind of encourages me, because I know that even sometimes when I'm like nitpicking about the smallest things, I know that when I look back on this novel 10 years from now, I'm going to say, oh, this was so bad compared to how I write now. But I like that, because I like to be able to evolve as a person and as a writer. So that's something I really love and respect about that. And I mean, I also love Stephen King. Green Mile is one of my favorite novels. I read it 3 times, I think, and I watched the movie twice. And just the way it was written, and that novel, I think, was very focused on the characters. And that was something that I loved about it. He brought the characters to life in such a clear and distinct way. And that's something I strive to do as well. So
interesting. I'm thinking that I recently finished reading Robert Sawyer's book. Oh, and I'm going to embarrass myself because I can't remember what the title was, but it was a mystery set on Mars. And Robert Sawyer, I admire him because he writes fiction that's enjoyable, and he gets the concepts of some pretty complicated science across to the people. Flash Forward, that was made into a television series.
Oh,
You're
yeah.
probably familiar with that. Well, that novel, when I was going through, there's a passage in there that I actually photocopied, and I'm trying to study it, because he's describing Einstein's theory of time. He doesn't call it that in the novel, but that's what it is, and I almost get it. So you never know where you're going to get your information from. Choose it. And I like, too, that you say that you're following an author to see their development. So does this mean that when you find a new author, do you go back to their older stuff first and come through, or do you jump in with something recent?
I actually usually do start from the beginning. It often happens that I find a novel and I didn't know that it was part of a series or something. I will read that one, and then I'll go back to see what the original ones were, and I'll start from the beginning, because that is something that I love to see as well. So, yeah.
Yes, that development. So he's good. So, who in the fantasy genre or the science fiction genre do you like to read?
Well, I have semi-recently,
okay.
I've read more children's fantasy, which is sort of what I write, which is not, I guess it would be like middle school age or so. So I'd read the Keys to the Kingdom series by Garth Nix, which is a fantasy, which is really good. And the younger one was for 9 to 12 or something, Children of the Lamp by P.B. Kerr, who also writes for adults. And James Patterson also has the Maximum Ride series, which is for kids and is a fantasy series as well. So I've kind of enjoyed those ones that I can think. Oh, and Artemis Fowl, sort of fantasy.
Okay.
Which is really good.
That's all good tips for listeners out there to go into the library. I recognize all of those. That's great. Now, actually, I was assuming, too, that this book, The Perfect Crime by A.A. Smith, that it's an adult novel, but now I'm thinking these are all young adults, so it's kind of a crossover, isn't it?
It is.
It is.
And I'm not sure if it was because of the age that I wrote it at. I was in grade 10, I believe, when I wrote it. But by the time I'd fully finished writing and editing to my heart's content, and then having others edit it as well, I was more in the adult phase. And so it sort of, I guess, came across a bit in the novel because of the age of the characters. But the situations that they're going through and the things that they learn along the way sort of are more adult than I would assume for a younger audience. But at the same time, when I was in grade 10, I read a lot of adult fiction, so I guess it kind of depends where you fall as a reader.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually I'm finding more and more crossover from young adult stories into adults reading young adults. So this is going to cover both audiences, I think. That's great. Now, I also know you mentioned, before we set up this interview, something about a student book report and working with the school system. Can you tell me a little bit how that happened? What is it?
Well, at my high school, it went from grade 7 to 12. So there was the 7/8, which was sort of like their middle school, and it was sort of associated with our 9 to 12 high school. And that was the high school that I went to, and since grade 9, whatever English teacher I had would be very surprised with the level of English that I had. And when I had creative writing in my grade 12 year, my teacher had the pleasure of editing The Perfect Crime. It was something that I'd already edited myself, but I submitted it sort of as a bit of work, as independent work, and he was like amazed by it. And he ended up telling the principal and stuff, and by that time I hadn't even thought about publishing it or anything. It was just a manuscript that I had, and I'd had other manuscripts as well already, but they told me as soon as you publish it, come back. And I just thought they wanted, they did buy copies for their school library, but then also they decided to use it in a grade 8 classroom. And so now it's being taught in their grade 8 class, and I do like correspondence with the students who read the book.
Oh, wonderful.
So, they have my email and Facebook or whatever's easier for them to contact me, and with the report they can ask me questions, whether they're confused or whether they want to just discuss something that happens in the novel.
Neat.
And so it's been a really great experience, and it's better than I ever imagined could have happened.
Well, so you've gone through this with a class already?
Yes.
That must have been interesting.
It was.
Grade 8?
Yeah. I introduced the book. The very first day they got the book, I was there, and I told them a bit about what it was, and I told them, I went to the school, and this is what I did, and I hope you guys enjoy it, kind of thing. And then I did a lot of correspondence with the teacher herself, and I helped her with the book report to figure out, what questions should be asked, what are the critical questions in this book, what are the themes that they should be paid attention to, and the character development they should really also pay attention to, and that's how it went, and it went really well. And then I had people asking me questions afterward that were very, very, critical questions, which I hadn't even anticipated from such a young age, but
yeah.
I was really happy and excited, and it made me feel really good.
Yeah, it would. That's exciting to be inspiring young people to read, for one thing, and probably to write. Okay, so we're coming up to a station break, and I realize that I'm being neglectful here. I haven't informed listeners how do they get a hold of your book. So when we come back from the break, let's talk about how they can buy their book. They can come into the library, of course, and read one, but I would like to know about a website and whatnot. So quick station break.
Deep in the heart of the Oak Ridges moraine, high above the town of Stouffville, in the woods of the Whitchurch Highlands, there lies a sealed treasure trove stacked with flat black discs that harbor cherished memories and musical delights. This is Valentre Gord, inviting you to join me on CIWS FM 102.7 every Saturday at 5 p.m. and Monday at 12:30 p.m. in the Vinyl Vault.
Yes, Stouffville, 410 Auto, award-winning automotive repair garage right here in Stouffville. Automotive Aftermarket Retailers Associate Representative, and the one-stop auto shop that hosts Auto Talk right here on Whistle Radio, specializing in European and Asian vehicles with specific fluids for your new vehicle to the utmost dated computer equipment. Give the helpful staff a call at 410 Auto, 905-642-2886, or web them at www.410auto.ca.
You know how to whistle, don't you? Just tune in to 102.7 FM and enjoy.
Hi, everyone, and I'm back talking with A.A. Smith, our young author of The Perfect Crime. Now, as I said before the break, A.A., where can people get this? Is there a website? How can they order your book?
Well, we do have a personal website, which is www.aasmithpublishing.com. And underneath there are different tabs, different sections. You can click Buy Books. It's very easy to find, very easy to navigate. We made sure of that.
Wonderful.
And then you can purchase it from there. Or you can purchase it on Amazon. You just type in The Perfect Crime. It's available in print and as an ebook, so that's another way that you can buy it.
Oh, wonderful. An ebook. Okay, so that wasn't EPUB, though. How was that experience going through the process of making this into an ebook?
That was another process in its own. Formatting to make it a print novel was difficult enough. There was a lot, because I started off writing in Microsoft Word, and it's normal size pages, single space, which is fine. But then you have to do different things, not only just for print, but then for the ebook. So you have to every chapter has to link back to the table of contents for people who are using it's.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes, so that when you open it and go to the table of contents, if you're using an iPad or a Kindle or something, you can click on chapter 1 and they'll bring you automatically to chapter 1, and it can do that to all of the chapters. So we had to do like separate link things in the formatting. That was very strange.
You were doing that, not people at Amazon.
Yes, I was doing that.
Oh, okay. I don't think I've ever had anyone come in and tell me about that process. That's really fascinating. Yeah, that's really fascinating. And, of course, Amazon's ebooks work on their Kindles. I think the iPads can do them as well.
I believe so. Yeah. I do not have an iPad, so...
Yes, that sounds good. Well, ebooks at the library, we always recommend to people who have the EPUB, because the Kindles don't work with the Canadian Public Library System.
Oh.
Yeah, as you can imagine, it's a publishing thing. But then you went for yourself. You printed this, had it printed, obviously printed by a printer.
Yes.
Yes, you didn't do that on a computer at all. It's actually a nice-looking book, smart-looking pocket book size. Now, in the book, I was looking at your cheat sheet from your school report thing, and it was talking about the settings. And at one point it says that it's set in Toronto. They're in Toronto. But after that, it's not identifiable. Can you talk a little bit about why you decided to leave it a little bit vague?
That's something that I actually tend to do in other manuscripts as well. I like to give a name just so that you have an idea of where in the world you are, in a sense. But if somebody in another country is reading this, no matter what landmarks I add, they're usually not going to be identifiable by that person in any case. Really, I think sometimes when you make the story too much about the setting, then it becomes a lot easier simply for the people who live in that setting to read, and a bit more just added information, maybe unnecessary information for people who don't necessarily know that area. And I know Toronto is a big area, but that's because we are in Canada and everybody knows Toronto and everybody knows. But if it's not the CN Tower, if I'm talking about specific streets, then it's not as, I don't think, necessary for people to know. Especially in this novel, they move around a lot. They're not really in one setting. And so to be sort of focusing on the setting each and every time would be a bit more unnecessary details when I could be driving the plot forward or something.
That's right. It would be a nightmare to be editing that for consistency, to find out,
yes.
Did I go down the right side street? Did I... Yeah. So you would prefer to concentrate on plot and characters? Those are your two main things? Interesting. Now, how can we talk about the plot without giving things away? What can we say?
Well,
Yeah, it's tough.
The story is about a group of teenagers, I suppose. They're adults almost. They're in their last year of high school. And they sort of get caught in this game where they're being controlled by somebody else, and they have to do what that person tells them to do in order to stay alive. And so they're given sort of challenges to complete, and they have adversaries. They have groups that they're competing against, both for their lives. And so there's a huge ethical dilemma in there as well, because when they live, it means that the other group dies, and they sort of can feel like they're murderers sometimes, which is really something that's hard to live with, and that's what I love to use to develop their characters and how they see it. And then there's also the challenge, whether it be physical or mental, of just completing the challenges themselves, which are not just always simple challenges. And then there's keeping it together as a group, because they're all individually having to deal with the fact that this is happening to them, and how they react to each other and how they remain a group or remain friends is another thing that I like to really try to explore in the novel.
Yes, and I don't think I'm giving things away because I'm early on in the novel, so I can't give too much away. But I enjoyed that, even though, as you say, you've got the two groups. You've got the main group, who hopefully we're rooting for. But even as a reader, well, what do you mean? The other one's going to just die? That's a moral dilemma even for the reader. But even within the main group, not everything is happy-go-lucky. Those characters are even being played off each other. So it's a really neat game within a game within a game type thing.
Yes.
Now, do you play video games at all?
I do, actually. I play many video games. I haven't in a while. I haven't had time to for about a year, which saddens me a bit. But I usually play, I guess, the normal, whatever, Halo, Assassin's Creed, Red Dead Redemption.
Do they inform your mystery writing?
I'm not sure. I can imagine that sort of in some of the techniques, because when you're in certain video games, whatever weapons I suppose you're using against enemies, then the way that the attacks sort of take place, I can imagine in my head, but at the same time, I've been writing for longer than I have been playing video games. So it probably influences me now more that is a bit subtle. I'm not sure if that's what's influencing me. I watch a lot of crime mystery TV as well.
All right.
So I'm not sure which aspect is influencing me more.
Wow.
But it could definitely have an influence.
Well, I wondered about that because you're not taking advantage of the gaming interest of young adults here. This is a game set in the real world. So, it's a neat little twist. So let me think now. What else? I wanted to also ask you about membership of writing community of Durham region and York region. These are members, groups you haven't met yet?
No, I have not.
Okay, let me do a promo if you don't mind. The Durham region, WCDR.org. There are about 350 members in that group. Out of them, about a couple of years ago, the WCYR, and they are WCYork.ca. And they're obviously York region. And they're a great place for networking. So I can imagine an author such as yourself, you could join them, get lots of emails, and attend their meetings. The writing group meeting from Durham has about 100 or so people. It's 8:30 in the morning, which I have a hard time getting to. But hey, it's worthwhile for the networking, and you might find some people there to promote your book too.
Oh, okay.
So there's a tip. Now we're also coming up, and I think we usually have for our listeners, our writers read a little bit. So would you like to tell a little bit about what you're going to read, and we're going to leave with our listeners? You're going to read a part from that novel, right?
Yes, I'm going to read just a bit from the opening, just to give you guys, I guess, an idea of how it begins and what world you're in. And, yeah.
Okay, then we'll let that happen. And thank you so much, A.A. Smith. A.A. Smith. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me. My heart was still racing when the train stopped inches away from the yellow line on the ground. The people surrounding me seemed nowhere near as edgy as I was. In fact, they seemed calm beyond belief. I picked up my one duffel bag, the contents of which were enough to last me a lifetime. I had an instant of panic, felt my inside jacket pocket, and smiled, knowing that my ticket was there. My last look outside as a free man was brief and beautiful. The sun was directly on the horizon, its reddish-orange infecting every form of nature as it awaited the moon's arrival. The man behind me tapped his foot impatiently, waiting to get inside. Getting the message, I stepped in and made my way to the higher level. I took a corner seat near the back, away from everyone else, and put my duffel bag in the seat next to mine. Holding the strap of the bag, I avoided the eyes of all other passengers. Less than 15 minutes later, The moon was shining just as brightly as the sun had in its time. It felt good getting away from that place. I didn't even know where I was going, but I felt better knowing that I was leaving. The train stopped again. I heard hasty and heavy footsteps on the stairs and assumed they were the steps of the ticket guard. I took out my ticket and held it in my right hand, waiting patiently. I looked up. There was a man in full uniform looking over everyone in the train. He didn't ask for any tickets, and seconds later, another two of them appeared, armed with guns and bulletproof vests. I switched seats, trying to hide from the officers, and lowered my head. I clutched the bag and hid behind the tall seats. Whatever led me to believe that I was safe here was soon proven wrong. He got to the end of the row and glared at me. The first cop moved in, snatching the duffel bag and handing it to the officer next to him. He hauled me out of the seat, cuffed my hands, and moved me down the aisle. The third officer recited in a cold, unforgiving voice. Eric Hernandez, you are under arrest for theft, assaulting an officer, and first-degree murder. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against— No, I yelled. You have the wrong guy. In a court of law, you have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed to you by the court. The cop holding the duffel bag walked down the stairs before me. When he was outside, he opened it, revealing approximately $1.2 million. This is not what it looks like, I gritted my teeth. Do you understand your rights? I was forced to do it, I screamed, staring at each of them in turn. I had no choice. He was going to kill everyone I knew. Do you understand? He yelled, the harshness striking me like a blow to the face. The cop took me by the shoulder, and I found myself face to face with the one who had read me my rights. I steadied my breathing and slowly replied, in almost a whisper, yes. It wasn't long before I was in the interrogation room, listening to a cop question me relentlessly. I stared at him blankly. I knew that my one shot out of this whole situation had to be used wisely, so I ignored his probing and repeated my only request for the umpteenth time. I'll only talk to Officer Putz. He was an old acquaintance, of sorts. The officer sitting across from me was short and stubby. He sighed, picked up his file, or should I say my file, got up, and left the room. I stood up and examined my surroundings. It was neither a small nor big room. One desk, 2 chairs, that was it. I walked over to the two-way mirror and saw my reflection. My light brown hair was usually spiked to perfection, but hair had been the least of my worries this past week, so it now rested flat against my head, without a hint of volume. I stretched a bit, and then circled the room once more. There wasn't much exploring to be done, so I ended up back on the chair much sooner than I'd hoped. I leaned on the desk, holding my head in my hands, and let this moment of utter boredom set in. I rubbed my temples and closed my eyes, only then realizing how tired I was. I opened my eyes, though I hadn't heard anything, and stared at the two-way mirror. I leaned my head on my right hand. I wondered what they were doing on the other side.
You've been listening to Shelf Life, news from the Whitchurch Stouffville Public Library.